Pippi Longstocking. Chapter 2. Pippi. No. Went to chapter 3 then. Pippi is a thing finder and gets into a fight. Annika woke up early next morning. This is Pippi's friend next door, Annika and Tommy. Annika woke up early next morning. She leapt out of bed and padded over to Tommy. That's a nice word, padded. Padded over to Tommy. Can imagine someone walking barefoot. "Wake up, Tommy," she said, pulling his arm. "Wake up so we can go to that funny girl with the big shoes." If you remember, Pippi Longstocking wears these enormous shoes that are twice the length of her feet. "I knew when I was asleep that today would be fun, but I couldn't remember why," he said, struggling out of his pyjama jacket. Then off they both dashed to the bathroom, where they brushed their teeth and washed much faster than usual. Their clothes flew on in double quick time. And a whole hour before their mother was expecting them, they came sliding down the banister and landed at the breakfast table, where they called out for their hot chocolate to be served immediately. Sounds a little bit impolite, doesn't it? Anyway, "What's going on?" their mother asked, "seeing as you're in such a hurry." "We're going to see the new girl who's moved in next door," said Tommy. "We might be gone all day," said Annika. That morning, Pippi was in the middle of baking ginger biscuits. I love a ginger biscuit. She had made a huge ball of dough and was rolling it out on the kitchen floor. "And I'll tell you why," she said to her little monkey. "What good is a tabletop when you've got to make at least 500 ginger biscuits?" There she was, kneeling on the floor and cutting out biscuits at lightning speed. "Stop treading in the dough, Mr. Nilsson," she snapped, just as the doorbell rang. Pippi ran and opened it. She was as white as a miller from head to toe, and when she energetically shook hands with Annika and Tommy, they were drenched in a cloud of flour, as white as a miller. That's a nice expression. A miller meaning somebody who mills flour. Grain. You mill the grain to create the flour. "How very nice of you to look in," she said, shaking her apron and sending up another cloud of flour. Tommy and Annika got so much flour in their mouths it made them cough. "What are you doing?" asked Tommy. "Well, I could tell you I'm cleaning the chimney, but you're far too smart to believe that," said Pippi. "In actual fact, I'm baking, but I'll be finished in a jiffy. You can sit on the log box and wait." What colour do you think she'd be if she was cleaning the chimney? "You could certainly work fast." She could certainly work fast, that girl. Tommy and Annika sat on the log box and watched her stamp out biscuit shapes all over the dough, hurl them onto the baking trays, and then throw the trays into the oven. It was almost like watching a film, they thought. "Done," Pippi said finally, taking out the last tray and slamming the oven door shut with a bang. "What shall we do now?" Tommy asked. "Well, I don't know what you're thinking of doing," Pippi said, "but I'm not the kind to put my feet up. I am, in fact, a thing finder, and thing finders never get a minute's rest." "What did you say you were?" asked Annika. "A thing finder." "What's that?" asked Tommy. "Well, someone who finds things, of course. What else could it be?" said Pippi, as she swept all the flour on the floor into a small pile. "The whole world is full of things, and there's a crying need for someone to find them. And that's just what a thing finder does." "What kind of things?" asked Annika. "I know, all sorts," said Pippi. "Clumps of gold, ostrich feathers, dead rats, teeny-weeny nuts and bolts. Stuff like that." Tommy and Annika thought it sounded good fun, and they really wanted to be thing finders too, although Tommy said he'd rather find a clump of gold than a dead rat. "Well, we'll have to see what turns up," said Pippi. "Something always does. But let's get a move on in case any other thing finders come along and make off with all the clumps of gold around here." The three thing finders set off. They thought it was best to start looking among the houses close by, because Pippi said that even if it was perfectly possible to find a little nail or bolt in the middle of a forest, the best things were actually found close to where people lived. But on the other hand, she said, I have seen examples of quite the opposite. I remember the time I was looking for things in the jungles of Borneo, right in the very middle of the rainforest where no one had ever set foot before. What do you think I found? Well, I'll tell you, a very fine wooden leg. I gave it away later to an old man with only one leg, and he said you couldn't buy such a fine wooden leg even if you had heaps of money. Tommy and Annika watched Pippi closely to see how a thing finder behaved. Pippi ran from one side of the road to the other, shaded her eyes with her hand, and looked and looked. Sometimes she crawled on her knees, stuck her hand through fences, and said disappointedly, Odd. I was absolutely sure I saw a clump of gold. Can we really take everything we find? Asked Annika. Yeah, well, everything that's lying on the ground, said Pippi. Further down the road, an elderly gent was sleeping on the lawn outside his house. He's lying on the ground, Pippi said, and we found him. Let's have him. Tommy and Annika were flabbergasted. No, Pippi, we can't take an old man. We just can't, said Tommy. Anyway, what do we want him for anyway? What do we want him for? Well, we could use him for lots of things. We could put him in a little rabbit hutch instead of a rabbit and feed him dandelion leaves. But if you'd rather not, well, that's fine by me. But it really annoys me to think another thing finder might come along and pinch him. They walked on. All of a sudden, Pippi gave an ear-splitting yell. Oh, I've never seen anything like this, she shouted, picking up a rusty old tin from the grass. What a find! What a find! You can never have too many tins. Tommy looked at the tin doubtfully and said, What can you use that for? You can use it for lots of things, said Pippi. You could put biscuits in it for one thing, and then it would be one of those nice, tins for biscuits. On the other hand, you don't have to put biscuits in it, and then it would be one of those tins not for biscuits. It's not quite so nice, mind you, but that's all right too. She studied the tin, which really was very rusty indeed, and also had a hole in the bottom. This almost looks as if it's a tin not for biscuits, she said thoughtfully, but you can always plonk it over your head and pretend it's the middle of the night. So she did. With the tin over her head, she walked along like a little metal tower and didn't stop until she fell over a fence and onto her stomach. There was a loud crash as the tin hit the ground. There, you see, said Pippi, taking off the tin. If I hadn't had it on my head, I would have fallen flat on my face and bashed myself stupid. But, said Annika, if you hadn't had the tin on your head, you wouldn't have tripped over at the fence in the first place. Just as Annika finished speaking, Pippi gave another yelp and triumphantly held up an empty cotton reel. It must be my lucky day today, she said. Such a dear, sweet little cotton reel to blow bubbles with or hang on a piece of string and have as a necklace. I want to go home and do it this very minute. At that moment, one of the garden gates opened and a boy came racing out. He looked scared, and that wasn't surprising because hot on his heels came 5 boys. They soon caught up with him and shoved him up against a fence, where they all started piling into him. All 5 at once began hitting and punching him. He was crying and holding up his arms to protect his face. Get him, boys, shouted the biggest and strongest boy. He'll never dare show his face on this street again. Oh, said Annika, that's Victor they're beating up. How can they be so mean? It's that nasty Bent. He's always fighting, said Tommy. 5 against 1 as well, the cowards. Pippi walked over to the boys and prodded Bent in the back. Sorry to bother you, she said, but are you planning to make minced meat of little Victor, seeing as 5 of you are having a go at him at once? Bent turned round to see a girl he had never met before, a completely unknown girl, daring to prod him in the back. At first, he gaped in utter astonishment, and then a wide smile spread across his face. Boys, he said, Boys, leave Victor and have a look at this little girlie. Oh, what a girlie. He slapped his knees and laughed. In a flash, they'd all gathered around Pippi, all except Victor, who wiped his tears and cautiously went to stand next to Tommy. Have you ever seen such hair? It's like a bonfire. And those shoes, Bent continued. Can I borrow one of them? I want to go out rowing, but I haven't got a boat. Then he took hold of one of Pippi's plaits, but dropped it immediately, saying, Oh, ow, I burned myself. Then all 5 boys stood in a circle around Pippi and leapt up and down, shouting, Red Riding Hood, Red Riding Hood. Pippi stood in the middle of the circle, smiling in a friendly way. Bent hoped she would cry or get angry. She should be looking scared by now, at the very least. When nothing he did worked, he gave her a shove. I don't think you have an especially charming way with the ladies, said Pippi. And with that, she lifted him high in the air on her strong arms, carried him over to a birch tree that was growing nearby, and hung him over a branch. Then she took the next boy and hung him over a different branch. She sat the next one up on a tall gatepost outside one of the houses and threw the next boy over a fence, so he landed in the middle of the flower bed in a front garden. I'm going to stop there. That's my front doorbell.